Alright, so I played a game recently called Yakuza. I would not recommend this game, and there are a handful of reasons why. However, I obviously played this recently, and at the time, in 2005, it was probably pretty groundbreaking. I mean, the whole slew of series of games doesn't spawn out of a crappy first title. Right now, though, I got a whole lot of complaints. This honestly was pretty sad because whatever I tried from PS2 recently is destroying my nostalgia, and while I haven't played this one back then, there were a few games I did play, and none of them feel anywhere near as good as they did back then. Oh well, that's emulation for you. So what is it about? So this is gonna come as a shock, but the game is about the organized crime in Japan. Wow, I know. The setup is what the protagonist take the fall in for his sworn brother Nishiki. The crime is murder of a family boss. Now, 10 years later, Kazuma comes back from prison and tries to pick up the pieces of a life he left behind. So what did I enjoy? The combat is actually kind of fun. There is a caveat to this later, but I still feel like there's a pretty nifty system here. It's pretty simple combo system, and by default it's not very enjoyable, but after talking to a certain old man and learning some other moves, well, it becomes a lot more enjoyable. Those really vary it up, with attacking backwards, suddenly counter-attacking with precise timing, fighting game style Yukemi, and a handful of other things. But personal favorite is the fact that I could just go around ripping off advertising displays and pummel people into dust with those. That was fun. A lot of background items are usable, and I enjoyed trying to find all the weird things that can be used. For example, you can reach into a random trash pile and pull out a suspicious needle. Okay, so also it does look pretty stupid when walking around with a chair twice my size and kicking the crap out of someone with it. Yeah, I loved that. Also, the story was not very well executed, but I enjoyed the ideas behind it. Clearly, if it was made today, not nearly 2 decades ago, God, it's been far too long. I still remember when PlayStation 2 was considered a fresh, new console. Where did all the time go? Anyway, if it was today, it would be better directed, paced, and actually make more sense. But there are certain topics tackled which are still interesting. Like corruption, government overreach, shady organizations, all sorts of illegal activities, fatherhood. Probably something else, but the gist is what this was a cool story combining all sorts of different things. It's just it suffers a lot from being in the game. For example, at times there is Majima. That dude is just, he is something. And the fact that he's voiced by that person, yeah, it's basically Joker. Does it make sense for Joker to randomly appear in the story and cause crazy crap to happen? Don't think so, but it is kinda fun nonetheless. Some other stuff doesn't work as well, though. Anyway, what did I dislike? First and the biggest, and the most annoying problem in this entire game is the camera. Holy crap, I tried very hard to think of a game where I was as frustrated by the camera as I was here. I remember stupid low ceilings in WoW. I remember God of War having fixed camera perspective, hiding enemies and obvious secrets. I remember awkward as hell first-person platforming in a couple of shooters. Even Warframe had some stupid design decisions like gigantic shoulder cannons covering the scope. All of those were minor. At worst, a temporary annoyance. In Yakuza, bloody hell, this is an achievement in terrible camera design decisions. Frequently, just walking around, it switches at random. So the player moves in one direction, but the gamepad must detect slight movement and updates in direction, prompting the player to move in an entirely different direction. Then there are also times when going up and down the stairs, the camera randomly jumping to a new perspective, often obstructed halfway. Some streets are borderline impossible to navigate without walking forwards and backwards a few times. But boy, oh boy, none of that mattered very much. Where did it matter a lot was combat. And I don't remember ever being so frustrated with a game not goddamn doing what I tell it to do. Protoss Dragoons are smooth as butter in comparison. Every single time there was a fight, enemies were just off the screen, or Kazuma randomly turned just 10 degrees away, avoiding hitting the enemy completely. Or something else as idiotic as that. But I think the best example of this atrocity of a camera is the last boss sequence. well, technically second to last boss, so by then the enemies frequently have guns, and it's borderline impossible to see them before taking like 20 shots to the face. Here though, there was a boss who did nothing but run around for a while and then shoot a gun. And the old trusty camera kept spinning uncontrollably non-stop regardless of what I tried to make it do. It honestly would have been easier to play if it was focused on a random spot from a bird's eyes view and everyone looked like an ant. At least then I could tell where the hell anyone was. I don't think I'm describing well the true gravity of this. So I'll just say that it's simply the worst camera I've ever seen in any game ever. Witcher 1 had the worst combat system I have ever experienced. Now here comes Yakuza and with the worst camera, and I wonder how many more worst ever achievements I can find. After this is probably the second biggest problem, but possibly more frustrating at times. And any Final Fantasy player would be familiar with this. Random encounters. I mean, it's worse than Final Fantasy, but at least there it's a fantasy world full of adventure. You'd expect something on the way. In Yakuza you're in the middle of a goddamn city. With a crime rate this high, the rate of homicides would top Brazil, Nigeria, India and Mexico combined. It's truly nuts how often it happens. And it doesn't even matter if I am with a child, bleeding to death, or running around with a goddamn shotgun. The random thugs don't care. No. THUGS. God, so difficult to pronounce things with TH. The rest of the problems are generally more forgivable, but they're still present. So there is a shooting segment at one point, and that was the closest I have come to throwing in the towel. If you aren't familiar with the console games and shooting, then let me tell you what those do not mix. Gamepad was not made for precise aiming, neither is it any good if the targets constantly move, and there is only a janky half-turn the player can make to aim at them. It was not enjoyable, but thankfully it was very short, and only once did it ever happen. Difficulty also seemed to be pretty forgiving, but yeah, it was still utterly impossible to aim at that stupid thing. I would not be able to complete without save states. After that I have general complaints which is difficult to convey easily, but the gist is this: the game is pretty bad at telling the player what it wants. So take examples, take Quest for example. Generally the main ones have a very easy to see tracker. Cool. Problem is that sometimes it doesn't point where to actually enter. And sometimes it just disappears, there's no tracker at all. And sometimes it points toward the wrong thing. At times there are also items needed and there's no indication where to get said items. I scoured the entire city looking for dog food, only to find cat food. And as it turns out, this game was remade. So now every freaking search result is for remake instead of the original. Which doesn't have the things in the same place. And I took a random Reddit comment, not talking about this directly, to figure out what the store with the dog food is actually the one at the bottom of the map, almost straight in the middle. It's the one right by the taxi, so that was fun to figure out. I spent nearly like an hour trying to... Okay, I'm exaggerating, more like 10 or 20 minutes, but still. It felt like an hour, just trying to figure this out, and running around, constant random encounters, you know, this stuff, it really combines into a lot of frustration. But then there are also side quests, and the quest log boils down to the name of the quest and that's it. Great tracking, very helpful. Player is also supposed to pay attention to NPCs or random stuff around them, because side quests aren't marked in any way on the map. Which isn't terrible, but the problem is that there are actually time-sensitive quests, and unlocks tied to completing everything, which means that beating this 100% without a walkthrough is borderline impossible. And it was pretty frustrating to find that I'd miss out on some actual story too. Anyway. But in that I'd complain about the story and its delivery. Like I said, there are times when things don't make sense. For example, Kazuma bringing Haruka into random places. So Kazuma is going around to kick some ass. And of course Haruka, the little girl, comes along. That makes sense. Then another time he goes to a soul plant, which is basically a brothel if you aren't Japanese. Because... I don't know, does any Westerner know what a soul plant is? It didn't make sense to me, but yeah, apparently that's a thing. Anyway, perfect place for a little girl, right? Another time Kazuma is told to attend a funeral, but he can't be seen. However, he can still talk to a whole bunch of people without a problem and walk around doing awkward, annoying quests. only to bump into a random guy who wants to kill him, and the ensuing fight doesn't alert anybody. So I can probably go over everything in this game, because all of it doesn't make sense like this. Every single moment. I can point out so many things. Or how some certain moments drag, or how this line was stupid, or how this particular event doesn't make sense at this particular time. But this is gonna take as long as the game itself, so I'll just say there are problems with the story. Which is pretty much it. There's very little else to say. I think at this point, people who have at least heard of a franchise associated with the side activities, and there are some here. Problem is what they all suck? I guess it's the first in the franchise, so it's just like the first pancake, but at least it wasn't an important part. It's just a side thing here. That's probably the only thing I didn't bring up. So yeah, it's an old game now, it's outdated, and there are serious problems. But I played it and found a bit of charm in the PlayStation 2 jankiness. And that counts for something, at least.